is Parshas Behaalotecha, which means it starts off Behaalotecha es Haneros. The Kohen, the priest, went into the temple or the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and lit the menorah. And it's an interesting terminology because Behaalotecha means when you raise up. When you raise up. So the commentaries jump in and say, why don't they say light the menorah? Why raise up the menorah? Raise up. Interesting use of terminology here. And the answer is truly the foundation and mission statement of every human being on earth. That the simple answer is when the Kohen lit the menorah, he had to make sure that the flames rose up before he left. You know, sometimes you light your Shabbos candles or your Hanukkah menorah or a candle and the flame peters out. So the reason he uses the terminology raise up to make sure the flames stay lit before you kindle the menorah. That's the practical explanation of why the terminology is used. But another reason is because everything in the Torah is not only for one time and one place. It's a universal lesson for every single moment in our lives. And the kindling of the menorah, the raising up of the flames, Hasidus, Jewish mysticism explains, is the mission of every single person on earth. That we have to raise up and inspire other people. Every person is a flame. Ner Havaya Nishmas Adam. The flame, the candle of God is the soul of man. Every one of us has to be a lamplighter and ignite and light up another person, inspire another person. And that's why, and interestingly, that all the work in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple or the Mishkan, could be only done by a Kohen or a Levi. The menorah, the kindling of the menorah, could be done by any layman or woman. Yet there's an interesting dichotomy here because the menorah was in the inner chamber, and we know only Kohanim were permitted into the inner chamber. So how could you, Kim, Margaret, Carrie go in and light the menorah? It says, okay, anyone can light the menorah in the temple. How do you get in? You're not allowed in. So they had something called the long pole. This is very fascinating. Think of a long wiki torch. So if you, Margaret, wanted to light the menorah, you would get the long pole and you would reach in and be able to kindle the menorah. It's called the long pole. Or another thing is the Kohanim would bring out the menorah. They would bring it out of the room. So what's the point of the long pole in our theme that every human being has to be a lamplighter? Is that sometimes it's not easy to light a kindle a menorah. Good morning, Anne. Good morning. Sometimes a person is distant. A person is rude. A person is disconnected. And when you try to reach out to your child, your relative, your friend, and introduce them, say, come to my Shabbos table, come to my Passover table, come to shul, let's say a prayer together. They push you away. But you need to sometimes stretch out more than necessary, the long pole. And I'll give you an example, an interesting story from the Torah. Who remembers when Moses was put into the basket on the Nile River, right?
Yep.
And Batya, Paro's daughter, is bathing in the Nile River. And she hears cries of a baby. And she sees in the distance a basket. Now, she was no dummy. She knew her father had issued a decree that every baby boy be killed from the Hebrews, from the Israelites. So she kind of understood that there's a baby in a basket. It must be a mother who had put their child in the river to escape death. And the baby was really too far for her to reach. But the Torah clearly indicates she reaches out to get the basket. But why? It wasn't reachable. Because she intuitively wanted to save the baby. So the Medrash tells us that her hand became extended, like almost like silly putty. Like, remember the Gumbies, the stretchable figures you bought the kids?
Yeah.
So God made a miracle where she was able to reach out and bring the basket in and save Moses from drowning. So when you reach out, when you use the long pole, so to speak, to kindle the menorah, or again, raise up, inspire another person, don't worry. You make the effort and God will do the rest. That's the concept. So people say, what's your job? I remember overhearing a conversation. They said, Rabbi, to my husband, what's your job? My husband says, I'm a lamplighter. You're a lamplighter, Rabbi? Yes. I find candles, I find oil, and I ignite it. That's the job, to ignite someone, to light them, to raise them up, to inspire them. That's how the Torah portion opens up with our mission statement. What is your life about is raising up the light, raising someone else up. And the olden days, by the way, lamplighters were actually people who took long poles and they would go down the city streets. I don't know if you remember, and they would light those gas lights at night. It was a job, just like sanitation and other government officials. They were called the lamplighters. That's where the terminology comes from. Good morning, Anne. We missed you.
Hi, sorry.
Now it's fine. So there's a story, you know, Chelem, the Chelemites. There's jokes about Chelemites, always mocking them that they were very silly people. But really, the people of Chelem were brilliant, so that's how all the fables came into being, making fun of them because they were really brilliant people. So there's a Chelem story. There was a big storm, and a gorgeous snowfall had fallen on the ground. And it's evening, and the lamplighter has to go around town to light the lights, right? So people could see. So they all stick their heads out of the window, and they go, no, 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 no. You cannot go light the lamps. We don't want you ruining the beautiful snow. So they always have meetings about everything. So through the window, they have a meeting. What are we going to do? What's the solution? The lamplighter will walk around town lighting the lamps. He'll muddy up the snow, the beautiful snow. So the solution was they would get 4 men, put him on a chair, and carry him around so that he wouldn't mess up the snow. So this is these are, I don't know if you, I love Chelem stories. There's amazing stories that you can laugh and laugh and laugh. You know, they have all these kind of stories, of solutions, ridiculous solutions. So lamplighters. So going back, every person can go into the Beit HaMikdash and light the menorah. Each and every one of us can be a lamplighter in this case. We have to raise up the lights. We have to make sure that the flames remain lit. On this note, there were 3 things that they built in the Beit HaMikdash that were made of one piece of gold or silver, not attached or soldered together. The menorah was one piece of gold. You couldn't separate the pieces. The trumpets that they used to make announcements, and the cherubim. Remember we discussed the cherubim, the sculpture of a baby boy and baby girl's face that sat on the ark in the inner sanctum. You remember the cherubim? We discussed that when the Jewish people had a good relationship with God, the cherubim faced each other. And when God was upset, the cherubim faced away from each other, indicating the relationship of the boy, God, the groom, and the girl, the bride, the Jewish people. So these 3 items were all created from one piece of solid gold or silver, that they can never be severed. Like what you can, you know, sometimes your candlestick, one candelabra, one branch breaks off because it's a separate piece, has to be resoldered, and so on. These 3 items were all one piece, which made it actually quite difficult for the craftsmen to create them, because it had to be made from one chunk of gold or silver. And the question is why? Why not make it easy for them? Say you could use a few pieces of gold. Because these 3 items are the foundation of life. The trumpets symbolize leadership. The kruvim symbolize children, education. And the menorah symbolizes Torah, light. These three things are difficult to create, difficult to make from one piece of gold. It's difficult to become a leader and create leaders. It's difficult to stay true to Torah. And it's difficult to educate children and raise them well. However, if you stay on the course, you will be able to create great leaders, strong adherence to Torah, and children that grow up to be responsible, moral, and ethical adults. So what the Torah is saying, that these three foundations of the world, of the universe, of life, have to be made from one piece, these items. Crafting takes expertise and patience, but once you finish the item, you bring it to fruition, it stays solid, it stays strong, because it's made from one piece of gold. So that's why God told the Jewish people when they created these three items for the temple, or the Mishkan, the tabernacle, that could be made only from one piece of gold or silver. Just an interesting tidbit I thought that I'd like to share. I thought it was interesting. So does anybody, yes, go ahead. Margaret, you want to add?
The rabbi said yesterday that it would be sort of impossible for people to create a menorah out of one piece of gold, and so therefore it must have been created by God.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, of course, if the rabbi said it. No, but it's true. It's true. You know, like we mentioned with the long pole, that God gave directive, and they did it, and God helped it along. So that's like another kind of theme, is that when you take initiative, you're not in it alone. You have siyata d'shmaya, it's called, the help of above. Sometimes very hard for us to take some on, because we feel we're going down the rocky waters alone, or we're taking on this impossible task. But as we discussed so many times, if you let it go and say, you know, God, I'm taking this on, I have to take it on, or it's meant for me to take it on, I need a little help here. You have to be open, and you will get the siyata d'shmaya. You have to be open to it. The Kabbalah uses the term keli. You have to be a vessel to absorb the light, to get the assistance. If you start saying, you know what, I could do this myself. I am a self-made woman. I don't need help from anybody else. God says, okay, go ahead. Oh my, to argue with you. You know, so that's a concept of, yes, it was a difficult endeavor when God said, do it exactly this way. But at the end of the day, as Margaret pointed out, God made sure it was done right. The item came out beautiful. Anybody want to add or say something? So now there's a lot of topics in Behaalotecha, but I want to share a cryptic story that happens in the Torah. And it's interesting that all the stories you read about Abraham and Sarah, how, you know, they had two sons and one was a rebel and had that influence on Isaac, and they had to send him away, and all the stories of life, the jealousy of the brothers of Joseph and how they sell him and he ends up the viceroy. You know, God could have doctored out the Torah and made it seem perfect. The matriarchs and patriarchs never had doubts. Everybody was exactly perfect. You know, everyone, but the Torah is the guidebook of life. Real people, real stories, real problems, real issues that they had to deal with, even though they were the matriarchs and the patriarchs. But real stories. Why? So that we could relate to it and say, you know what, I can relate to this because I'm feeling the same way, or I'm having the same challenge. So now there's an interesting story that happens. I want to read it to you straight from the Torah translation. Okay? Miriam and Aaron. Everybody remember Miriam and Aaron? Miriam is the oldest child of 3 children of Amram and Yocheved, spiritual leaders of the Jewish people in Egypt when we were slaves in Egypt. And Moshe is the baby. And Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moses, regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. They're talking about his wife, Zipporah, who was, by the way, a Midianite. They said, has the Lord only spoken to Moses? Hasn't he spoken to us too? Like, we're also prophets. Moshe's not the only prophet in the family. And Hashem heard, God heard. Now Moshe, God said, was exceedingly humble, more so than any person on the face of the earth. So we know that Moses is documented as the most humble person ever to exist in humanity. And then Hashem, God says to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, go out of your home, go out, all 3 of you, come to the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting was kind of like the tabernacle where God spoke to the prophets, Moses. So they, all 3 of them, the 3 siblings, leave their home and they come to the tent of the meeting. And God comes down in a pillar of cloud, because that's how he spoke to them. And he stood at the entrance of the tent. And he calls Aaron and Miriam and says, come here. And they go out. And God says to them, if there be prophets among you, usually, how do I speak to you? God says, I speak to you in a dream. But not to my servant Moshe, no. He is the most faithful, refined throughout my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, not in a vision, but not in riddles. And he beholds the image of God. So why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moshe? God was upset at them and he left. This is the story. So what happens next? The Jewish people have to pick up and continue traveling. Yet Miriam is afflicted with who knows what. She spoke bad about Moshe. What was the affliction of the time? Lashon Hara, we spoke about it. Leprosy. She's afflicted with leprosy. Now, if you're afflicted with leprosy, you have to leave the camp. You have to become excluded and isolated for 7 days until you repent, you get purified, and then you can rejoin the gang. Aaron is also slightly afflicted, but not like Miriam. So the Torah relates that she gets leprosy. She goes out of the tent for 7 days. And because she saved Moshe from the Nile River when he was a baby, this is a very important piece of information, the entire nation of Israel waits for her. They were supposed to leave, remember, but now they waited the 7 days till she can rejoin the group and travel with them. She was 87 years old. Why, the Torah says? Because she waited for her brother Moses when he was a baby in the Nile River. She was rewarded. He's 81, she's 87. Look how many years later she receives her reward. And then they continue to travel. This is the story. So let's understand the whole story. Let's analyze it. Let's see what is it trying to teach us and so on. So to understand, let's first of all go back to who Miriam was. Let's go back to Miriam. Does anybody know any information about Miriam, Aaron's sister? Please share. Anything you know about her. Anything you read in People magazine about her. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Margaret, anything?
Isn't the tambours or the singing or something, was she the one?
Yes. So when they crossed the Red Sea, remember it says they sang the Song of Songs. And they sang the song Oz Yashir, and Miriam took the women and danced and sang with them. Very beautiful, okay? But let's go back even earlier. She's 6 years old. And her father, Amram and Yocheved, are the leaders of the Jewish people who are slaves, the Israelites as they were called then, slaves in Egypt. And Moses, Pharaoh has an astrologers who tell him, you know what we see in the stars? There's going to be a boy born, and that boy is going to usurp your kingdom. He's going to destroy your kingdom. He's going to, how do you call it when you usurp a king?
Yeah.
So what does Pharaoh say? Any baby boy who's born, I'm going to have them killed. We'll throw them in the Nile River. He makes a decree. So Amram and Yocheved make an announcement among the people of Israel. Every man and wife should separate. We have to practice birth control. No one should give birth, including ourselves. Everyone abstain. We cannot allow our children to be executed by Pharaoh. So Miriam is 6 years old. She goes to her parents. She says to her parents, "You're worse than Pharaoh. You know that?" And they're like, "What?" She says, "Yeah. You declared that no child should now be born among us. Not even girls are going to be born now because you told everybody to abstain. So not only boys won't be born, girls won't be born. We will be eradicated. We will be extinct. You cannot allow Pharaoh to dictate." How did she know? She was a prophetess at age 6 already. She had a vision and insight. When Amram and Yocheved heard their 6-year-old daughter share this, they realized she's right, and they realized she was very special. So they reversed their edict, and Yocheved at that time becomes pregnant with Moses. Okay? So look what's going on over here. So Miriam, Aaron, and now in the 7th month, Yocheved gives birth prematurely to Moses. And Torah says, rightfully, God made a miracle because every 9 months they would come check. It was like Nazi Germany. They were very organized. If they found out you were pregnant, they would come 9 months later and wait till the baby was born and take away the baby and kill him. So God makes a miracle that Moses is born prematurely in the 7th month. So for 2 months he's home. When the 9th month comes up, Yocheved knows she now has to part with her baby. So she puts him in a basket lined with tar, like a little mini rowboat. And she covers him over and she puts him in the Nile River, hoping that he'll be safe somehow, some way. So Miriam doesn't just let her brother be put in the Nile River. No. She's going to make sure her brother is safe. So when they put the baby basket in, Miriam stands and follows it as it floats down the Nile River, and she keeps an eye on him. She's not letting her brother go into the Nile River on his own. And she watches the way Batya is bathing in this Nile River. Now, the Nile River is the longest river, I think, in the world at the time. So it's not exactly like it's a little lake here. She watches that Batya is bathing and sees her brother. And she watches the whole scene unfold where Batya takes out the basket and the baby's screaming, he's hungry. So they right away bring a nursemaid. But Moses does not want to eat from a non-Jewish person who's not one of the Israelites. So he refuses. He's a newborn. He's 9 months old. So Miriam happens to be standing there, of course, because she's watching. And she says to Batya, who's, like we said, she's no stupido. She understands. "Should I bring you a Jewish nursemaid?" So Batya says, "Yes." So she quickly brings her mother. So Yocheved ends up staying with her son Moses until he's weaned. So who really raises Moses in the palace? Yocheved, his own mother, because she's the nursemaid. So though Batya adopts him, his own mother really raises him until he's weaned, which is a while. In those days, they nursed for a while. So because Miriam does not leave her brother and does not let him suffer even for 1 hour, it says, and without milk, the entire nation of Israel waits for her to travel when she is afflicted with leprosy. So also this gives you an insight who Miriam was. Miriam was not a person that, oh, let me just talk about my bro here. Yeah, let's see what's wrong with him. She was a prophetess from age 6 already. She single-handedly, in a sense, changed the course of history. And it says in the Torah that the water during the travels to Israel from Egypt, there was a well of water that traveled with them like a floating water fountain. And it said it was called the well of Miriam. And when Miriam passes away, as we'll hear in the coming weeks, the well of water disappears. And that's why, remember the story, Moses hits the rock? Because the people crying, they go, where's our water? We have no water anymore. There's no fresh water. Miriam is gone. So God says to Moses, talk to the rock. The rock will give you water. Be nice. So in the merit of Miriam, we had water. She single-handedly allowed the people of Israel to rebuild the nation before they left. They said the women had so many babies after that, they couldn't stop it. And another interesting tidbit that I love, is that Miriam and Yocheved are called, they were the midwives. Their jobs as they grew old, they were midwives. They delivered the babies. That's how they were able to save all the babies. They hid them from the Egyptians. And their nicknames were Shifra and Pua. Yocheved was nicknamed Shifra because Shifra means to beautify. She washed the babies, she beautified them. You know, she put little bows in the girls' hair, and she put little bonnets on the boys. And Miriam was called Pua, midwife Pua, because she used to say to the babies, poo, 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 poo. And there's a lot of organizations in the Jewish communities that are called Shifra and Pua organizations, which named after Yocheved and Miriam, and they help mothers who give birth, they help mothers who are overwhelmed, they have mothers like me who have 11 children, they help you out. It's called Shifra and Pua organizations.
Is that where they get the wise tale, or whatever you want to call it, going puh.
Yeah, poo.
Evil eye.
Yeah, maybe, the Rashi says she used to say to the baby, poo, which is like, comforting tone of voice. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yeah, my grandmother used to say, poo. She looks gorgeous, poo. Yeah. So now, do we have a better picture of Miriam? Kind of clarity of who she is? She's no regular gal off the block. She is strong, she is smart, she's a prophetess, she stands up for what's right, and she's courageous. Paro would say to her, what happened to all the babies that were born? She said, I don't know where they are. She used to hide them. So now let's go back to the story. But before we go back to the story, I want to remind one more point again. I want to hone it home that look how the good you do always comes back in a positive way, could be years from now, a positive reaction. You might do one little act of goodness now and say, what's the big deal? What did I do already? I watched my brother. I made sure he was safe. I made sure he got a little bite to eat. Look what happens generations later. The whole nation of Israel, over 1 million people, are waiting for her to get better. God says, you're going to wait for her. Yes, she got leprosy. That's a separate story. But you're going to wait for her. And they wait for her. They could have moved on and she had to catch up. I want to share a story before we go to the story about the conversation. I read this beautiful story actually in Hebrew in an Israeli magazine, and the author is this soldier. This Israeli soldier writes the story, what happened. So he and his buddy were in Hebron during a very dangerous time, and their shift was over, so they were taking a break, and they heard a single gunshot wound, a gunshot. So he says to his buddy, his name is Yair, should we go investigate? He says, nah, it's one shot. One shot means either somebody accidentally shot their gun or who knows what. But if it was not a staccato, there's nothing to worry about. But something tells this guy Yair that he's got to check it out. So he says to his friend, look, you don't want to go? I'm going to go. You rest, I'm going to go. So he says, you know what? You're going, I'll go. And they go down an alleyway and they see one of their fellow Israeli soldiers was fatally shot in the heart. And he's like on his last breath. So they start performing first aid. They call in a helicopter, a medevac. And by the nick of time, literally the doctors say by seconds, by the way, this is a true story, they save the soldier. And it happens to be he's an only child. His name is Yuval. And the parents come to the hospital and they piece together the story of what happened, that there were two soldiers and they happened to go down the alley and they rescued their son. And they want to find out who was the guy who saved their son, their only son. They want to thank him. But nobody's saying, everyone says, listen, you don't have to know. It doesn't matter. The guy's a very humble guy. He doesn't want to be thanked. He was just doing his job. You don't have to worry. But it really bothers them that they didn't get to thank the soldier. So they have a grocery store. So they hang up a sign in the window. Whoever knows a soldier who saved our son on this and this day, please, please, we want to meet him. So the other soldier who didn't want to go check it out sees the sign and he says to his friend, Yair, just go in. All they want to do is thank you. It's an only child. Just go in. So Yair goes in, and the mother and father are in the grocery, and they hug him and they kiss him, and they say, Yair, we can't believe it that you saved our son Yuval. You know, he's an only child. What can we do for you? He said, you don't have to do anything for me, he says. I'm only here because of you. They go, what? What are you talking about? He says, I don't know if you remember 20 years ago, there was a young couple that used to come into your store. They were so poor, they couldn't even afford a loaf of bread. And you made sure every day you added more food to their bag and you gave them on credit and you said, you don't have to pay me back. And one day from the newlyweds, this young woman comes in and she's very upset. And you, the grocery shop woman, asks her, what's going on? You look very upset. She says, yes, I am. I have to tell you I'm pregnant. And tomorrow my husband and I decided I have to get an abortion because we can't even afford to pay our own bills. How can we raise a child? We have no money. We're penniless. So you said to my mother, no, 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 no. You will give birth to this child and my husband and I will support you and help you until you can get back on your own feet. And you convinced my mother to have me. And so I'm only here because of you. And who would know that 20 years later, Yair would save the life of their son, Yuval. So this is the story of Miriam. This is really the story of any good thing you do. You never know the interaction, the reaction that will one day resonate across the universe and come back to you in a very good way. And like I always say, I read, the Eibishter bleibt nicht abal chayv, which means in English, God never remains in debt to anyone. So any act of goodness and kindness, you never know how it will one day come back and illuminate, save, bring light into your life. So never minimize something, even the smallest, minutest act that you could do. Never minimize. Never say, what did I do already? Anything you do always has an effect. Any physical act has a spiritual reaction. Also in the negative, but we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about positive acts. So this is Miriam. She followed her brother down the Nile, he gets saved, and she doesn't suffer even an hour, the Torah says, before he has a proper nursemaid to give him sustenance. And he is the Moshe that saves the Jewish people, and she is the Miriam, the famous Miriam. Now let's go back. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Now let's go back to the very strange story that happens, okay? If you don't mind, can we? Should we? Okay. So Miriam speaks to Aaron. She initiates the conversation. And she says to him, you know, bro, we're the oldest siblings. We got to do something about Moshe and his wife, Zipporah, the Cushite woman. Rashi says, why is she called the Cushite woman? She was a Midianite, daughter of Jethro, because Cushi means dark-skinned, Ethiopian, and she was so beautiful both inside and out, and just like you cannot deny when it's dark outside that it's dark, you couldn't deny her beauty. So she's called Cushite woman. It's a complimentary terminology. It's like saying the dark-haired princess. You know, she's beautiful like a dark-haired princess or whatever. So she says to Aaron, we got to do something about Zipporah. What's going on? Moses was overworked. So God said to him, you got to appoint helpers. So he appointed 70 people to help him out with judgment, court cases, teaching. He had a whole crew now of judges and teachers and so on. And two of them were called Eldad and Medad. And Eldad and Medad prophesied, now that they're at 70 elders, God gave them prophecy, energy of prophecy. And they prophesied that Moses was going to die shortly. So Joshua, the student of Moses, is going to become the next leader. So Joshua took a front and he came running to the tent of Moses. And in the tent was Miriam and Zipporah, the family. And he says to Moses, you got to do something about these new prophets, Eldad and Medad. They're blasphemizing. They're saying, you're going to die. I'm going to become the leader. So Moses says to Joshua, what's going on? You're jealous that more people have prophecy? What, there's not enough to go around? Because remember, Moshe was a very humble guy. And Miriam overheard Zipporah, Moses' wife, going, oh, woe to the wives of Eldad and Medad. He says. So Miriam goes over to Zipporah. She says, what do you mean, woe to their wives? What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? He says, because now that they're prophets, they're going to have to separate. They're not going to be intimate with their wives anymore. So woe to the wives. So in a very refined manner, she kind of indicated to Miriam that her and Moses weren't exactly intimate right now. Because when Moses came down from the mountain, he told the Jewish people for 3 days before the giving of the Torah, everyone separate from your wives, purify yourselves. Refrain from anything physical so that you can focus on the spiritual. After the giving of the Torah, God says to Moses, okay, tell everyone they can now resume their relationships with their wives, but you stay with me. So Moses felt that this was a directive that he has to stay apart from his wife, because at any given time, God prophesies to him. So from this story, it seems that Moses and Zipporah, although they lived together, they weren't intimate. Okay, so Miriam overhears this from Zipporah. She feels terrible. So she wants to help with the marital situation. So she says to Aaron, what are we going to do about the situation? We got to knock some sense into Moshe here. He's a married man. He's got to be with his wife. So her intentions were honorable. She wasn't saying it in a mean way. She wanted to help Zipporah, who she loved dearly. She wanted to correct the situation, wanted to sit down. She says, Aaron, go sit down. You're the older brother. Sit him down and say to him, you're a prophet, you're a leader, but you also have a family you have to take care of. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Another commentary says that there's a whole different story going on over here. What she and Aaron were going to tell Moshe is, listen, you're now the great Moshe. You're the greatest person that ever lived. Now, you're married to Zipporah. Who's Zipporah? Who knows who Zipporah is? How did he find her? Anybody know? Jethro, the story of Jethro. So a little background is necessary. Anybody, Carrie, you were going to say how he knew her?
Zipporah was rescued from Egypt because Ramses' father offered her as a gift to Moses as the brother. Jethro was Zipporah's father.
Right. So
They rescued her.
So it's not, oh, he rescued her. That's okay. So the story's a little different. Remember, Moses kills the Egyptian soldier, the guard, because he's trying to kill the Jew, right?
Yes.
He buries him in the sand, and then his fear caused Paro to find out, and he now is a fugitive of justice. So he runs away to Midian. It's a very romantic story. And Jethro, Yisro, was the king of Midian, or rather the high priest of Midian. He had more idolatry, they say, than the whole Egypt. He knew every idol worship. He was a Buddhist, and he had ashrams. He had anything you could imagine. And his 7 daughters took care of his cattle. And they were being bullied by the male shepherds. Right. It's interesting. Look at all the history of the Jews. They're always meeting the wise by the well. Remember the other? Eliezer goes to the well and he meets Rebecca. She's by the well. Jacob goes to the well and he meets his wife, Rachel. Everyone meets at the well. Interesting. It's another thing we have to discuss another time. Why romance always takes place by the wells. Margaret, you're muted. Unmute.
It's like the water cooler in the office.
Exactly. My friend from Westport told me the funniest story. She's going to take out the garbage. So her mother says, "Where are you going?" She's going to take out the garbage. Her mother says, "Without lipstick." You never know who you're going to meet. So maybe now I knew is the, in the apartment buildings, the inserator, whatever that thing is, you put in the garbage anyway. So he's at the well. He comes upon the well, and they're being bullied. So he saves them. He's a strong guy. He chases away the other shepherds, and he helps them water the sheep. And he meets Zipporah, and she says, "Come to meet my father." So he hangs out there, and next thing he knows, he sees in Zipporah a woman who will follow the ways of the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jewish way. So Jethro sees in Moses something special, so he offers him his oldest daughter. So she ends up being the wife of Moshe, and they have 2 beautiful sons together. As a matter of fact, she ends up circumcising her son. Remember the story. They have to go back to Egypt because God says to Moses, "Time for you to assume the leadership." And Moses doesn't want to circumcise his son yet because it's dangerous to travel with a child that's newly circumcised. So she circumcises because she sees Moshe's, a poisonous snake wraps around Moshe and is going to kill him. So she goes and she takes a knife and she does the circumcision of their oldest son. So Zipporah herself was a special woman, but her father was an idolater. They had, like I said, he had more forms of idolatry, they said, than anyone else. He was a brilliant guy. He was a philosopher of the generation. And his older daughter marries Moshe, even though later Jethro becomes a convert. He converts to Judaism, and he ends up joining the Jewish people. But he's a head of the priests. So Miriam and Aaron are saying to "Look who our brother married. The daughter of a priest, the daughter of an idolater. It's a pasnish. He's now Moses. It's time to divorce her and take on another wife, a more sophisticated aristocracy, a woman who comes from a family like the matriarchs, the patriarch, the descendants of the Hebrews, of Israelites. It's a pasnish she should marry Zipporah. This is a very interesting commentary I saw. We could have just stayed with the first commentary. Sounds a little nicer, maybe. Right? But I wanted to share this because a very interesting insight here. So they go to Moshe and they say to him, "What? What are you talking? You know who Zipporah is? Zipporah took me in when I was a nobody. I was penniless. I was a fugitive of justice. She took me into her house." I should now that I'm Moshe, the prophet, now I should leave my wife? What are you talking? Who does that? He says to her. He says to them. That's why God says to Miriam and Aaron, he's not only someone I speak to face, he's one of the most refined individuals and humble individuals. God is answering for Moshe. You think your brother is going to leave Zipporah because you don't feel she represents the aristocracy of Moshe? Your brother is so refined, so humble, he would never leave Zipporah. You got it all wrong, he says to them. You're talking about a person who's Moshe. You're not talking about another guy who becomes a celebrity and now his family is not good enough for him anymore. He has a new young wife with fully Botoxed. His old wife doesn't fit his persona anymore. Now he needs a new wife. Doesn't have the right yichus. This is Moshe. He and Zipporah have a history. She married him when he was nothing. She married him for Moshe, who he was. She saw his qualities before you all knew who he was, in a sense. That's why now suddenly God says he's the humblest of all men. He's refined. I speak to him face to face, mouth to mouth. What is God suddenly telling us he's so humble? What does it have to do with the conversation? To show you that if you're thinking Moshe is going to leave Zipporah because he doesn't fit the family image now, you have something else coming to you. So really, what you think about the stories here, it's the story of, again, human nature, human life. You know, sometimes there's a match made for your child. That family, they don't fit our family. The child of a convert? I'm from the holiest of the holies rabbis. But sometimes, like with Rabbi Akiva, her father, right, the wealthiest man, said, you're going to marry the shepherd on my property? He doesn't even read Hebrew, this Akiva. But she saw in him something, and she married him, and he becomes the great Akiva. So sometimes people who are haughty, arrogant, think, can't intermingle with those, but they end up being the most refined, respectable, special people, but more importantly, suitable matches for their child. Moshe and Zipporah had a great marriage, beautiful children. What, Moshe's going to leave her because what? It's not for him. It's exactly for him who she was. So this is what the Torah is teaching us about human nature. But again, that's why Moshe is the Moshe of the generation. He's the humblest of all people. It's interesting, how could he be called the humblest of all people? They didn't know who he was? Such a guy spoke straight to God, was the humblest of all people? He had no ego? What do you think? How could he even be the humblest of all people? Would you be as humble as him if you were Moshe? Think about it for a second. What's your opinion? Share what you think. Don't be shy. How could he be called the humblest of all men? God calls him the humblest. And what's so terrible if he wasn't so humble? He did the job, right? Sometimes you say, he's so pompous, he's so arrogant, but you know what? He does good for us. She does good for us. So she's pompous, who cares? Right? Sometimes you take a person with their faults. Not everybody, you say, if I looked like her, if I had her brains, her looks, and her money, I'd also be arrogant, you say to yourself, right? So you can't fault her for being so arrogant. She has everything.
But he was humble because when he met her, she was just a shepherd girl. She was no big deal. She wasn't from royalty. She wasn't from anything. And yet they saw within each other something special.
Right. As a matter of fact, she, though, was from aristocracy. Her father was the high priest of Midian, one of the wealthiest. He had more money than anyone. So actually, he, in a sense, if you want to look at it, he was a prince of Egypt. He ran away as a fugitive, and then he ends up in the high priest's house. It was very rich. Jethro was a prestigious guy. So he actually married up if he wouldn't be Moshe, in a sense. In the non-Jewish world, he married up because her father was wealthy and intelligent. He was the head of all the priests. He discovered every religion and every idolatry, you know. So in a sense, he was pretty prestigious, Jethro. So anybody have any thoughts about that? So interestingly, it is because he's so great and so close to God that he's so humble. Because the more he saw God's greatness, the more he realized his nothingness. So there's two ways greatness can play out. One way greatness pays out, you say, yeah, you know, I took the Jews out of Egypt. Yeah, I have a little bit of a lisp here, but, you know, it's not my fault I burnt my mouth. And I am the Redeemer. I'm the one that went up the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I wrote the Torah, and God's standing right near me. I went up the mountain and down the mountain. You know, or you could look at it, wow, again, the more greatness you see, the more you realize how much more you have to do. Great
But
people.
He also probably believes that it wasn't him, but it was God that did it through him. So therefore, he doesn't really take credit for it.
Brilliant. Yes, I agreed. Well said. I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, acknowledging the fact that, like, I'm really nothing. Without God, I'm nothingness. Or could I have gone and thrown a stick that turns into a snake, and I have climbed up the mountain? Very well put, Margaret. I think you said it better than I could have said it. That seeing that everything he could only do through God. Very well said. Anybody want to say something else? Margaret, you want to say anything else about that?
No. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense about that. That when you do something good, you have to feel that it wasn't just you, you know. So you're happy to be able to be the conduit of it.
Right. Yeah. So we had three commentaries here. One commentary said he spoke about the fact that he's separated from his wife, you know, time to get the marriage back on track. The second commentary said they wanted him to remarry. You need a wife with a little more prestige. And there's even a third commentary that I didn't share that says the reason they don't say Tzipporah is because he married another woman. He took another wife. And they were going to say to him, chutzpah, why do you need another wife? You have Tzipporah. But I didn't bring that commentary up because most commentaries don't agree with that he took another wife. They agree with either A or B. But there are different commentaries who are free who are themselves great sages who did write that. So, you know, Henry Kissinger, when he became Secretary of State, Golda Meir was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time. Are you hearing a weird sound?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was my answering machine.
Oh, no, that's fine. So when Henry Kissinger became Secretary of State, I really want to tell you another story, but I'll tell you the story first. Golda Meir was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time. So he writes her a letter like this. Dear Prime Minister Meir, I'm excited to help bring peace to the Middle East. We'll work together with Israel, our ally. But I want to remind you of three things. And please remember the order in which I write them. 1, I am a citizen of the United States of America. 2, I am the Secretary of State of the United States of America. And thirdly, I'm a Jew. Please remember the order. So she writes back to him, Dear Mr. Kissinger, thank you very much for your beautiful letter. I too hope that we will make peace in the Middle East and work together as allies. And I am very pleased with the three things you listed and the order in which you listed them. Because you see, in Israel, she says, we read from right to left. In other words, in Israel, first you're a Jew, then you're a secretary. He wanted to tell her, don't expect any favors from me because I'm Jewish. She turned the tables on him. So, he was brilliant. Henry Kissinger's father, Louis, knew my father. He used to subscribe to my father's Yiddish newspaper. So whenever my father met Henry Kissinger in his journalistic activities, Henry would say, Gershon, look, my father reads your Algemein. And my father says, I know. So anyway, my father many times was critical of Henry Kissinger because he didn't always do what was in the best interest of the Jewish people in Israel. So Henry Kissinger was a master negotiator. So they asked him, how did you do it? He says like this. This is how I did it. He says, I went to the Serbian peasants and I said to the Serbian peasant, I have a fantastic match for your son. The guy says, who? Who? Rockefeller's daughter. Rockefeller's daughter? An American? She'll never. Oh, no. He said, an American girl. An American girl? I don't want an American girl. Rockefeller's daughter. Rockefeller's daughter? Okay, excellent idea. Arrange it. My son will marry Rockefeller's daughter. He goes to the largest Swiss bank and he calls up the head of the bank. He says to him, I have a new president for the bank for you. He's a guy from Serbia, Serbian peasant. He's a fantastic new president for the bank. Guy says, what? A Swiss bank is going to take a Serbian peasant to be the president? He says, yeah, he's Rockefeller's son-in-law. Oh, Rockefeller's son-in-law. Excellent. So now the appointed Serbian peasant is now the president of the Swiss bank. Now he goes to Rockefeller, calls him up, Mr. Rockefeller, I have a fantastic match for your daughter, Helene. Yeah, who? I'm dying to marry her off to somebody good. He's a Serbian peasant. A Serbian peasant's going to marry my gorgeous Helene, daughter of the Rockefellers? What, are you crazy? No, he's not just any Serbian peasant. He's the president of the largest Swiss bank. He's the president of the largest Swiss bank? Sign him up. Let's arrange for the match. Rockefeller calls his daughter Helene into his office. He says, Helene, I have a fantastic guy I want you to meet and marry. He's perfect for us. He is president of the largest Swiss bank. Right down your alley. What? I'm going to marry a Swiss banker? They're all Shylocks and thieves, and they're money hungry, and they're egotistical, and they're arrogant. I'll never marry a Swiss banker. No, darling. But he's the son of a Serbian peasant. Oh, okay. I'll marry him. So that's how he would negotiate the deal. Made a whole, like my Bubba said, Pasha Vardishkas. So Moshe didn't do too bad with Zipporah. He did okay with her. So in summation, what we see here is a few things. That who Moshe married and who Zipporah married is who they meant. First of all, they're Basher, they're soulmates. And it is precisely where you see the character of who Moshe truly is. Humblest of all men, because he was the greatest of all men. It is his greatness that allowed him to become so humble, which is really the highest form of greatness. And then, beginning of the Torah portion, Behaalotecha, we have to always raise up the lamp. Our mission, if you want to sum up your mission, why are you in this world? What is your purpose? To become and be a lamp lighter. Light up someone else's life, either through knowledge, acts of goodness, acts of kindness, inspire someone, help someone. This is who we are. We're put on this world to light a flame, to light another flame. And the beauty of light is sometimes, you have money and you give away your money, you don't have the money anymore. Even though it's a mitzvah. The beauty of light and a flame is no matter how many candles you light from your candle, your light never diminishes. That's the power of a flame. That's the power of being a lamplighter. And many people say, look, I'm not so knowledgeable. How could I teach someone else? I'm not so rich. How could I help someone else? Whatever little you do have or don't have, whatever little knowledge, if you know an aleph, you could teach someone else an aleph. If you know aleph, beis, gimel, you could teach someone else aleph, beis, gimel. You don't need to wait till you know the entire alphabet before you can share your knowledge. I remember, and I'll conclude with this, I was in it's called Torah College, first year. We had philosophy was the, psychology was one of the courses. And the teacher started to teach. And I came home and I started to practice on my family. So my older brother used to tease me and say, one course in psychology and you're already a psychologist. And that's the thing. Yes, one course in psychology and everybody could be a psychologist. So that's what we all have to be.
Freida?
Yes.
One question. I came in a little late because I was having difficulty getting on. Where did that come from about being a lamplighter?
Because this Torah portion is called Behaalotecha. What does it mean? Behaalotecha es haneros. When the Kohen kindles the menorah, it says, you shall raise the candles. So the question, the commentary says, well, that's not proper English. It should be light the candles. So the practical answer is, when you light the candles in the menorah, the oil in the menorah, don't leave till the flames are truly lit, because sometimes they peter out. You know how it is, you light and it goes out. So the Kohen had to make sure the candles were lit. But the second is, why does it use the word raise it? Because every one of us has to raise the flames. Who's a flame? A human being. We all have to become lamplighters and raise the flame, inspire, and ignite other people. That is our mission in life. So this Torah portion is really the mission statement of why we are put on earth, to be lamplighters. Lamp symbolic of godliness and goodness, and which is godliness. Light has God. Light is a metaphor for God. Light is a metaphor for a lot of things, but because light has the qualities that we can identify with. Light fills the room. Light is abstract. Light is dispels darkness. Light is symbolic of knowledge. Light is symbolic of Torah. Light has a lot of elements that help us define. God uses manly, humankind terms to identify, because otherwise how would we understand it? God is ununderstandable, so God uses metaphors we can understand, light, and so on. So just that's why. Yeah, that's. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
Good job, Freida.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos, good Shabbos. Shabbos, good
Thank
Shabbos,
you.
everybody. A pleasure. Good Shabbos. How's it going
so
in
much.
Florida? Hot?
Yeah, it's hot but sunny, so it's good. All
Good.
good. Yeah, teaching some people via Zoom. I have some students via Zoom, which is lovely. I'm teaching a class of students from up north.
It's
So
beautiful.
it's good, and it's just so funny because the reason I asked where did that come from is because I had a teacher in college. This was a long time ago, and in child development, because that's what I studied. And she said that if you just light one candle in the world, that is very important. And, whenever I think, oh, I don't have enough students, I don't have enough this, I don't have enough that, I always think, yes, but if I can light one candle. And so it just fits so much into what you were talking about.
Yeah. Right.
So
Because
I want to know where it came from Judaism, because she was not a Jewish teacher.
Right.
And, she was so right on.
Yeah, it is. And, that's why it says every person is an entire world. Like
Right.
every drop of rain is, you see the entire universe in one drop of rain, the same concept. So there. So yeah, and so be hatzlacha with your yoga. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Good
Good
Shabbos.
Shabbos. Margaret,
Bye-bye.
how's Puerto Rico?
God, we don't want to go back with all this stuff happening.
Oh, you don't want to come back home? Okay.
Yeah, right. But yeah, it's fine here. It's fine. It's just very hot. But yeah, we had some people